Hello, boys and girls. Today, you will learn how to solve a system of equation using Gaussian elimination. Our equation today is 2x minus y equals 7 and y equals 3. Now we will have to put this into what we call an augmented matrix. This matrix will give us another way on how to solve this system of equations. Now to set up our problem, we will put the 2 in this spot, this -1 here, a 7 here, and then a 0, a 1, and a 3. Now we have this system of equations set up into our augmented matrix. Our first step in solving with Gaussian elimination is to get a 0 into this spot right here. The next part in solving an equation, system of equations using Gaussian elimination, is to get 1s into these two spots right here. And finally, this is our result and what would be our finished product of solving using Gaussian elimination. So to solve this equation, we have to think back to our first two steps. So our first two steps told us to get a 0 in this position and a 1 in these two spots right here. Luckily, this problem is set up in that we have our first two spots almost already finished. So what we have to do is to get a 1 into this position right here. How do we get a 1 into this spot? We will multiply it by 1/2. But if we multiply one part of our equation by 1/2, we have to multiply the rest by 1/2 as well. So our next part of our augmented matrix will be a 1. 1/2 times -1 is a -1/2. And then 7 times 1/2 is 7/2. And then you would bring the rest of this part down. So we have 0, 1, and 3. And this is the final part of our augmented matrix.
Hi kids. So once we have a 1, and a 0 in its correct position in the augmented matrix, the next step is to change it back to equation form. So for this case, we have 1x minus 1/2 y equals 7/2, and then y equals 3. In order to solve this equation, we have to plug 3 into y. So we have x minus 1/2 times 3 equals 7/2. When we multiply this, x minus 1/2 times 3 would be 3/2 equals 7/2. Next step in solving a system equation is we have to move the -3/2 to the other side. This changes it to equal x equals 7/2 plus 3/2. X then equals 10/2, where we find our final answer, x equals 5.
Here is another example. 2x plus 3y equals 6, and x minus y equals 1/2. So first, we have to get that into our augmented matrix. So our first step is to get a 0 here. Now the way we will do this is by multiplying this bottom row by -2. We will get -2. -2 times -1 is 2. And -2 times 1/2 is -1. And then you would bring the first row down.
Go.
So what we will want to do is add row row 1 plus row 2. So 2 minus 2 is 0. 3 plus 2 is 5. And 6 minus 1 is 5. And then we will bring the first row down. The next thing we will have to do is to get a 1 in this spot and in this spot. So we will multiply row 1 by 1 over 2, 1/2, and multiply row 2 by 1/5. Coming up here, 1/2 times 2 is 1. 1/2 times 3 is 3 over 2. And 1/2 times 6 is 3. 1/5 times 0 is 0. 1/5 times 5 is 1. And 1/5 times 5 is 1.
The final step is to change it back in the system of equation. So we have x plus 3 over 2y equals 3. And down here, we have y equals 1. The step is now to use a substitution. We plug y into this top equation. So x plus 3 over 2 times 1 equals 3. This, of course, equals x plus 3 over 2. To solve for x now, we have to move 3 over 2 to the other side. So we get x equals 3 minus 3 over 2. Of course, we can't add these quite yet, but we have an uneven denominator. So, coming up top, we have x equals 6 over 2 minus 3 over 2. So x equals 3 over 2.